Welcome. Welcome to the United States of America. A lot of you, I think, are farmers, right? When you have quality seeds, you can put them in foreign soil and they will blossom, they will bloom. And we are excited to welcome you here to our country where we think you will bloom, and we will hopefully allow you to have fulfilling lives for your children, and then we will benefit alongside you.
You just watched a propaganda video put out by the U.S. Department of State where U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau gave white South African, quote, refugees a really, really warm welcome. But they're not just getting that big warm welcome from the Trump administration. They'll also be receiving a one-time $1,275 cash grant, additional cash assistance, food stamps, temporary housing assistance, a year of free health care, including mental health care, job placement assistance, and even legal aid to help them navigate the U.S. immigration system and eventually become U.S. citizens. And I've got to say, this feels like the way that we should treat all immigrants, especially if they're seeking asylum or fleeing countries that were destabilized in part by U.S. foreign policy. But as you all know, other immigrants don't receive this same treatment. Trump suspended the Afghan refugee program when he took office again, which has left countless Afghan families in limbo. He also revoked the status of 530,000 legal immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. On top of that, legal status for Ukrainian refugees has been temporarily paused by the Trump administration while they subject them to additional vetting. And Trump is in the process of hiring 20,000 new agents for his Gestapo in order to expedite the deportations of people, including deportations for people who were here legally but lost their status under Donald Trump. And conservatives used to pretend like they weren't against all immigration, just illegal immigration, because they simply wanted immigrants to follow our laws and do it the right way. But those same people are now conspicuously silent as Trump punishes immigrants who are trying to do it the right way. For example, Alma Lopez Diaz, a Salvadoran immigrant, moved to Georgia with her 3 sons, and her older 2 sons, ages 19 and 20, had just finished high school and started getting active in their community and even volunteered for their church. That is, until her sons were abducted by ICE during a routine check-in, and she never saw them again once they were taken away. And her sons are now part of a growing number of non-criminal immigrants who've been detained indefinitely with no idea what happens next. None of these immigrants know whether or not they're going to stay in detention for weeks or months or years, or whether or not they're going to be sent to Sakat in El Salvador or even Libya. And let's not forget about the legal Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, who revitalized a dying town and became model members of their community until, of course, neo-Nazis started to spread lies about them eating people's pets, which Trump then amplified on the national presidential debate stage. And that lie is still causing problems for them to this day. But on top of threats and intimidation, these legal, hardworking immigrants are now at risk of deportation because of this administration, even though they've done nothing wrong and have done everything right. So the question is, why do white South African immigrants get the best treatment imaginable while black and brown immigrants don't even get afforded the basic constitutional protections afforded to them, like due process or habeas corpus? Take a wild guess. I hate to oversimplify things, but it really is as simple as this meme. The Trump administration views black and brown immigrants as criminals and white immigrants as refugees. It really is that simple. Now, of course, Ukrainian refugees are an exception, but even they're not treated as poorly as black and brown immigrants because they at least have the opportunity to stay, assuming that they're going to be able to jump through the additional hoops that the Trump administration is throwing their way. But black and brown legal immigrants don't even have that option. Their legal statuses were just revoked like that, with no questions asked. They don't even have the opportunity to contest it. And even if they're lucky enough to not be affected by these recent changes, if they've been in the country longer, assuming, they didn't obtain residency under Biden-era programs, they are still forced to live in constant fear of deportation since all immigrants are being treated as if they're criminals, unless, of course, if they're white. But when it comes to white South African immigrants, this administration is rolling out the red carpet. And as The Hill explains, Trump signed an executive order in early February to formally pause all aid to South Africa and directed his cabinet to formulate a resettlement program for Afrikaners who he contended are victims of unjust racial discrimination. It is incredibly ironic to say that white South Africans of all people are the victims of unjust racial discrimination when they still benefit to this day from institutional racism that plagues black South Africans. Like, sure, they got rid of apartheid, but things weren't just peachy keen after that. There are still disadvantages imposed on black South Africans that don't inhibit white South Africans. So that is a wild claim there. But I take it that Elon Musk, a white South African Nazi, is the one who originally put this idea in Trump's head. Either way, Trump is seemingly happy that he finally found a white victim narrative to latch onto. And when he was asked why he's expediting immigration for white South Africans while halting programs for black refugees in Sudan and the Congo, his answer was genuinely infuriating and stomach-turning.
Our administration is going to welcome them as refugees. Now, this comes as you've halted virtually all refugee admissions for people fleeing famine and war from countries like Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why are you creating an expedited path into the country for Afrikaners but not others?
Because they're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed. Now, South Africa leadership is coming to see me, I understand, sometime next week. And, we're supposed to have I guess a G20 meeting there or something, but we're having a G20 meeting. I don't know how we can go unless that situation's taken care of. But it's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about. But it's a terrible thing that's taking place. And farmers are being killed. They happen to be white. But whether they're white or black makes no difference to me. But white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa. And the newspapers and the media, television media, doesn't even talk about it. If it were the other way around, they'd talk about it. That would be the only story they'd talk about.
What he just said there was unbelievable, even for him. He cut off aid to South Africa because they're doing a genocide against white South Africans. Yet in Gaza, he's giving Israel additional aid to continue their extermination campaign of Palestinians in Gaza. And of course, he denies that that's a genocide. The audacity. And to add insult to injury, he talks about the land of white farmers being confiscated, yet he's in the process of ethnically cleansing all of Gaza so he can build Trump resorts on their land. It is a double standard of epic proportions. I don't have the words to describe how despicable that is. And I get that it's Donald Trump, so we're accustomed to him saying insane shit. But that right there, that's a whole new level of disgusting bullshit from his mouth. The fact that South Africa's actions passes the threshold for genocide, but Israel's doesn't, is just incredible logic, if we can even call it that. But to understand why his claim about South Africa is so fucking absurd, I want to give you some additional context. So, as you all know, even though apartheid in South Africa ended, racial inequality still persists to this day. As Reuters reports, white South Africans only make up around 8% of the total population, and black South Africans make up around 80% of the population. Yet, whites own 3/4 of the land, while black South Africans own just 4% of the land. And that's not the only way that black South Africans are institutionally disadvantaged. But none of this is particularly surprising because you're not going to automatically achieve racial equity as soon as you move away from apartheid. More has to be done to right the wrongs of the past, to move away from that system of ethno-supremacy that was ingrained in the institutions of South Africa. And that's why the government passed the Expropriations Act. As NBC News reports, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, the government passed the Expropriation Act, which allows the government to expropriate land in some cases without compensation, in certain instances when it is unused or there's public interest in its redistribution. Critics of the new law say it could send panic through the farming industry, send land values plunging, and provoke violent land grabs, such as the one in neighboring Zimbabwe during the 1990s. But Ruth Law, a professor at the Institute for Poverty, Land, and Agrarian Studies at the University of Western Cape in Cape Town, says the new law mostly clarifies the expropriation powers the government has had for decades. So, to reiterate, this law clarifies the powers that the federal government already has which allows them in specific circumstances, mind you, to expropriate unused land or land that's in the public's interest. Now, you might think that this type of a thing seems a little bit tyrannical and that a government should never be allowed to seize property from citizens. But I hate to break it to you, South Africa is not the only country with this kind of a law. Do you want to guess another country that has this same type of power? The United States government, my friends. It's called eminent domain. And this is South Africa's version of eminent domain. And here in the United States, we have the Fifth Amendment to protect property owners from land seizures without just compensation. Make no mistake about it, the government does have the power to seize private property from individuals. But with the level of hysteria, you'd think that the South African government in particular is just overdoing it. How much land have they seized given the commotion? Zero. The answer is zero. They've seized no land from this law. But that hasn't stopped the Trump administration from condemning them for this, even though Trump has the power to do the same himself. And unlike the South Africa government, he actually has invoked his power to seize property. I will repeat, Trump has invoked eminent domain to build his border wall. In other words, it's plausible that Trump has seized more property from white people than the South African government. Pot, meat, kettle. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? But see, it's different because South Africa is using their version of eminent domain for racist reasons, whereas Donald Trump wasn't using eminent domain for racist reasons. I guess, I mean, maybe he was building the southern border because he wanted to decorate it, thought it'd be pretty. Maybe it wasn't about keeping brown people out. Yeah. But there's more, because he also claimed that these white South African farmers are victims of genocide. And as you probably could have already guessed, it's based off of anecdotes that are being sensationalized and deliberately misconstrued. As The Spectator reports, what is beyond doubt is that white farmers who often live on large properties far from their neighbors or the nearest town are seen by some as easy targets. The number of killings is worrying. Last year, there were more than 300 farm attacks and 50 murders. Farmers are understandably afraid, but does what is happening in South Africa amount to a genocide? South Africa has the third highest murder rate in the world, well ahead of Colombia and Mexico. The UK, with a similar population, has around 700 homicides a year. South Africa can log 450 in a week. Some of these victims are white farmers, but they are far from the only ones losing their lives at the hands of violent criminals. For every 100 murders, just 14 of the targets are women, 18 are men, and 5 are children. Overwhelmingly, murder victims are young black men killed by other young black men. Whites make up around 8% of the population and are the victims in roughly 2% of murders. So they're underrepresented in murders, in other words. Poverty, rapid urbanization, and vast numbers out of work have created a toxic situation that has given rise to crime, but not genocide. Based in Washington, D.C., Genocide Watch is the world's early warning system. It was founded in 1999 by Dr. Gregory Stanton, a professor of human rights law, who says that for all the tragedy of farm murders in South Africa, there is no evidence of a planned extermination. There are instead opportunistic crimes, sometimes acts of revenge, by workers who are owed wages or feel aggrieved with their employers, or just attacks carried out by thugs out for money. We have studied this for many years, Stanton said, and I've done research on the ground in South Africa. The numbers show us that white people, urban or rural, are much safer than their black counterparts and less likely to end up a slab at the coroner's office. Farmers, he said, are often vulnerable, isolated, and easy targets, but that doesn't make it genocide. In other words, the hysteria is based on a kernel of truth, but they're using anecdotes to exclusively highlight white victimhood while ignoring black victimhood, all in service of their white genocide narrative. It's kind of like how in America, Republicans exploit Laken Riley's murder to make broad generalizations about all immigrants. It doesn't matter to these people that American immigrants are less likely to commit crime than citizens. It's an appeal to emotions. They want you to suspend reason and logic and picture an innocent white victim of violent brown immigrants. They want you to associate violent crime with all immigrants, even if that is a blatantly unfair characterization. But with regard to South Africa, Trump is trying to make it seem like South Africa's government is killing white farmers and seizing property, when South Africa is the one government in the world, perhaps, that's actually against genocide more than other countries, given how they're the ones who brought the case against Israel before the International Court of Justice. Our country, on the contrary, we're the ones supporting a genocide. So it's ironic for Trump, who's complicit with genocide, to accuse the anti-genocide government of South Africa of committing a genocide. He should look in the fucking mirror. But if experts don't actually think that what's happening is tantamount to a genocide, well, that in theory should complicate things for these white South Africans, since if they're seeking refugee status, our process necessitates them to prove that they're being persecuted. So if this white genocide narrative is based on bogus bullshit, how are these people supposed to stay in the country? If a judge sees their case, they're going to say, oh, well, you don't actually have a valid asylum claim. You've got to go, right? Actually, you see, per the Amerikaners FAQ page, they conveniently don't have to prove that they're being persecuted. They simply have to articulate that they've been subjected to persecution in the past or that they fear persecution in the future without evidence. Sounds about white. But I mean, if Trump really thought that there was a genocide going on in South Africa, you would think that it wouldn't be that tall of an order to just ask that they give the government evidence of their persecution. But since that's not the case, something tells me that Trump isn't too confident in this claim. And I think it's best for him, of all people, to not start throwing around accusations of genocide, given how he's complicit with not one, but two genocides. In his first term, he was complicit with Saudi's genocide in Yemen, and in his second term, he's complicit with Israel's genocide in Gaza. Either way, I don't have a problem with South Africans who want to move here, because I actually am consistent and I think that freedom of movement is a human right. Everybody should be able to move wherever they want to. But I do take issue with the double standard. Everyone should be free to live in whatever country they want, but you don't actually have that luxury unless you're rich or white, because there's basically two ways that you can come to America these days. You can either buy one of Trump's $5 million gold cards, which gives you residency, or you can be white. And again, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm being overly reductive, but sometimes you've just got to call a spade a spade. The reason why anti-immigrant people are okay with this is because these white South African refugees are the type of immigrants that they want. They're racist. All right? We can say that. They are racist, full stop. And their reaction confirms that they are indeed racist. For example, Trump influencer Eric Doherty says, something about the South African refugees admitted into the USA by Trump tells me they aren't going to commit crimes and trash our communities. Can't quite put my finger on it. I wonder what he's alluding to here. And Wokeness says, women and children, fathers who have stable jobs, not one single gang tattoo. Everyone is waving an American flag. The only refugees the left hates. Oh, we're the hypocrites here. Got it. This is what immigration should look like. People entering the country in an orderly, polite manner, legally, respectfully. South African farmers will be a positive addition to the nation. Good for us. Welcome to America. The only refugees we should take in are the ones who will proudly wave American flags and contribute positively to our society and economy. They will work hard, raise good kids, and be the most patriotic Americans you have ever seen. The Afrikaners that have arrived today look like wholesome, happy families that could benefit us with their knowledge and experience as well as gain ours. I hope they find peace here. The kind of refugees that will actually benefit our society. Crazy, right? All of a sudden, MAGA is extremely uncharacteristically welcoming to these immigrants. It was probably the American flags, right? The American flags that they gave them for the photo op, I think that's what won them over. It wasn't anything to do with their race. I think it was the flags. Listen, to mention the flags, like, any other immigrant that was given the same opportunity would have proudly waved around an American flag. They just weren't propped up for a photo op. But it's just interesting that the MAGA movement is suddenly so welcoming to any immigrants when they said that they wanted to shut down the borders. I can't quite put my finger on the difference here between these immigrants and other immigrants, as Eric Doherty put it. Listen, I'm going to break it down for you in the simplest way possible so there's no confusion. White immigrants, good. Black immigrants, brown immigrants, bad. They like white people and they don't like black and brown people. Don't let them bullshit you or gaslight you. They're just fucking racist. Period. End of story. The people who cry the most about identity politics are obsessed with white identity politics. To them, racial equality feels like oppression, which is why they latch on to these types of narratives about the South African genocide, because in their minds, it gives them a concrete example of a victim narrative that they've been yearning for, because that victim complex justifies their treatment of black and brown people and soothes their cognitive dissonance. Regardless, they're racist as shit, and we shouldn't be afraid to call it like it is.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job. Getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.